Hello, my drunken Buddhas, welcome. Today we are going to be talking about resourcing. Now this is a technique or a kind of a concept or an approach that you can use to help you to hold, contain, process and integrate difficult emotions and to regulate your nervous system. So it's really helpful for supporting you through your life in those periods, especially when you might be feeling a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger, sadness, when we're starting to feel overwhelmed. Resourcing is one of the most foundational and fundamental techniques we need, and it's something we can practice over the long term, get really good at, and it forms a really solid foundation for moving through life in a way where we are using the challenges to heal, and we're not continuously getting overwhelmed and having to resort to coping strategies instead. So we're going to talk about what it is, why we need it, give you some examples of what it is, how you can create your own resource, and how you can practice that in daily life. And there'll be lots of examples and things scattered throughout the video. So let's get into it. What is a resource? So I like Stephen Porges' definition, which is an island of safety in our experience. So you may not resonate specifically with the word safety, maybe you do, but it's creating a sense of safety or support, a sense of home perhaps, or at the very least some sense of stability or neutrality in your experience. Because oftentimes, very intense nervous system states or very intense emotions, they're kind of the opposite of that. They're you might be agitated, overwhelmed, you feel unsafe, things feel very unstable and chaotic. And what we're going for is creating or finding the opposite of that experience somewhere in your own experience. Now, why would we want to do this, right? There might be a temptation at first to think, oh, okay, we're doing that to get rid of the difficult feelings and nervous system states. That's not the case. What we're trying to do with a resource, when we create that island of safety, that anchor, that place that resources us, then that gives us a support and sort of a hand, a shoulder to lean on to be with our experience of painful emotions. So it's not to help push those away or fix them per se, it's to give us the strength, essentially the capacity to be with our own experience. And what happens when you're not resourced, when you're not well resourced, when you don't have that island of safety to turn to, is then you have to turn to coping mechanisms, right? So if there's a lot of anxiety coming up, and you don't have any means of being with it, you don't have the capacity to be with it as it is, then you'll have to turn to alcohol maybe, or Netflix, sex, work, overthinking, anything and everything to distract, numb, and so on, to help you get through that moment. And that's all great. Those things are fine. Nothing wrong with that. It's just it doesn't really help you heal in the long term, because the healing happens when we're able to contain our experience, when we're not pushing it away and numbing it, and when we're not completely overwhelmed by it. In that sweet spot in the middle is that place where we can contain our experience and those difficult emotions can slowly unravel. So what kinds of resources are there? Let's get into what it actually is, right? So I'll go one by one through a few different options, so just to give you an idea. So the first one will be like a kind of a physical resource, I would call it. This is somewhere in your direct experience of your body or your senses that has that essence of safety, support, stability, neutrality, home, something in that direction. So a common one is the feeling of the feet on the floor, because you rarely get very powerful emotional experiences in your feet, right? Oftentimes people find they're quite cool, quite stable, quite supportive. You can feel your feet on the ground, so there's that pressure and that contact, which is very grounding. Similarly, you could do similar with your butt on the chair, your back against the chair is another one. You can feel into the stillness around your body. You notice there's all this space around your body. If you move your attention out, you can feel into the space in all directions. That would be another example, because that tends to also be quite still, stable, neutral, because you can't really feel emotions in the space a few meters in front of your body, right? Could be the hands, they tend to be quite neutral, so you kind of get the idea. These would be examples of that island of sort of calm, stability, safety in your experience. And I'll talk a little bit about how you would work with that in a minute. Another great example is using your mind more. So you could turn to a memory of a person or a place where you felt safe. So maybe you always used to go to your grandmother's house, on the weekend, right? And that place, you always felt really great there. There were never any arguments. It was only just happiness and joy for the most part. Then that might be a place you could imagine in your mind's eye and see yourself as a child going there. And then that might invoke those feelings of safety, being held by your grandma, happy memories, right? Where you might have felt supported by your grandma. And when you go back to that place in your mind, you kind of start to feel a sense of that in your body, right? You can feel the body shifting and some new sensations and energies arising when you really imagine that place clearly in your mind. And this could be a place out in nature. It could be, like I said, a friend, family member, a quiet place where you go by yourself. These are all great options. And the resource itself is that energy or sensation that place evokes in your system, right? And that imagination is just the trigger for that. Similarly, you can invoke what I like to call kind of a love resource. And this can be real or imagined. It's sort of a person or a being of some kind. It could be a pet, a family member, a friend, or it could be someone imaginary. It could be Jesus or an angel or God or a tree. The sky is the limit with your imagination on this stuff. But you basically want to invoke the presence of a being that you feel supported by, safe in the presence of. And that can be a very, very powerful one. If you find the right one there, you can really get a very strong sense of being held or supported if you do that, if you really go into one of those resources. For example, I've got clients who had like a pet that they were so close to, like a dog, when they were kids, and they grew up together and they just had so much fun and joy and love with this dog and so much connection. If they think of that dog again, like instantly there's a smile on their face, their eyes light up, they can feel the warmth coursing through their body, right? There's a sense of joy and love and connection that's instantly created. Or perhaps in the grandmother example, it's similar. Or some people, they might think of Jesus, just imagine Jesus behind them with a hand on their shoulder, just like, I got you, man. And again, all these things serve to just create an energy which feels supportive to your system. Again, not to push anything else away. It's not to try and push anything else away. It's to just create a counter reference point. You might have all this agitation and pain and stuff going on, and it just creates rather than getting entirely absorbed in that and starting to panic a little bit, it just creates a counterweight to that, essentially, where you can just look and say, oh, there's actually other stuff going on in my experience. There's this over here, which feels difficult and unsafe, but there's also this over here, which feels safe and helpful. So just a quick one. I'm talking about internal examples of ways you can resource yourself, but of course you can use actual friends and family and the community around you, going for a walk in nature. These are all also ways of resourcing, so long as you're paying attention to the way it's impacting your nervous system. If you're up in your head, going out for a walk, it won't help as much as if you're really present in your body and you're noticing how it is to be in nature, for example. Right? So how would you... there's one more, of course, I forgot. Breath, touch and movement is like a very, very natural way we can also bring a bit of regulation to the system as a mode of resourcing. So your breathing, if you're anxious, it could be quite erratic, and just maybe sighing, long, slow out breaths out the mouth, in through the nose. Just slowing down. That can be very powerful. Breathing into that space. You can use it as a way just to breathe into that difficult emotion. It makes it a little easier to manage it. You can also combine touch. You can bring a hand to your heart, maybe one to your belly. You could hold the back of your head, like that, one on the heart, one on the back of the head. You can give yourself a hug. Just give yourself a little rub. You can bring some movement, just swaying a little bit. And if you can combine it all, even if you just start breathing out slowly, just you're just giving yourself a hug and just swaying. Like, you'd be amazed at the difference it makes to just sitting rigidly like this, like, oh my god, I'm so anxious, fuck, what do I do? To just like, I'm anxious, okay. Think about, you know, whoever, I don't know, Jesus with his hand on his shoulder. It's like, we're anxious, that's cool. Or whoever it might be for you, a brother, a sister, or a friend, colleague, just someone you feel safe with. Again, this creates these energies which are a counterweight to the intensity of the emotion. So how would you actually use this in practice? In fact, let me first talk about how you might actually go about creating it, right? A few steps, because it works. I mean, you can work with a facilitator, like I help guide people through this. That's a great way of getting started, getting to know the ropes. But if you were to choose something simple, like, say you noticed that your feet felt pretty calm, you know, you were looking through your experience, what feels kind of supportive right now? You're like, oh, maybe my feet. So you might just put your attention on there. And you start just by noticing what's there. That's the first step. It's like, okay, what's there? Okay, I feel my pressure, like the pressure of my feet on the floor. It feels kind of cool. It feels kind of solid. I notice there's sort of a lightness on the top. Not much tingling or anything. It feels pretty stable. It's like staying quite the same. And then you notice what's kind of the impression of that. So there's the raw sensations. What's the impression of that? It's like, well, there's a solidity to it, right? It feels solid and grounded. And then you'd notice that. So you start by noticing the sensations. Then you notice like what that kind of impression those sensations evoke in you. It's like, okay, how am I noticing that solidity in my experience? Well, there's a kind of you're just turning towards, you know there's some experience you're having that's telling you, okay, this is quite solid. And you can just turn towards that and be curious about it and start to get to know that solidity. And the third step is like, well, what's the effect that's having on my nervous system? It's like, well, actually, if I just stay here for quite a while, it's quite grounding, it's quite reassuring. I might notice. And the longer you stay with this, you'll really start to notice your nervous system start to change. Even with something really simple, you might think, oh, just sitting with my feet for 2 minutes, that's not going to make any fucking difference. Try it. Try it. Feels reassuring. There's a strength there. It's like, yeah, we got this. It's okay. There might be other stuff. I notice a bit of a contraction in my chest. It's a bit of kind of burning in my neck. Like the skin's a bit unhappy. But there's that solidity there. It's like, oh, we got this. And just noticing that impact, the nervous system, letting that happen. Maybe breathing, bringing your hands to where it's a little tight. So that might be those 3 steps of just noticing, okay, what's the sensations? What's kind of the impression? What feeling does those sensations evoke? And just then noticing the third step, what effect that's having on the nervous system. So then how do you actually use this? There's a couple of different ways. Say you've got anxiety. I'm just taking it because it's an easy example and people relate to it a lot. You might notice there's anxiety in the chest, right? And say our resources, let's change it up. Let's say our resources like a sense, we think about the pet we had when we were a baby or when we were young, and it evokes a sense of warmth in the belly. You would pendulate, that means move between. This is the first technique. You pendulate between the anxiety and the warmth. So you would feel into the anxiety, see if you can allow it to be as it is, allow it to be anxious, let it tighten, let it contract, staying with it as best you can. If it gets a bit too much, this is when you'd swap down, pendulate out of it, take your attention away from it, but rather than using some coping mechanism that's, not as healthy as could be, you'd feel into that warmth. You might imagine the dog, coming and giving you a lick on the face or whatever, and just feeling into that energy. And that's by then just turning to that warmth, to that resource, that support, it allows you to then have been with that anxiety for a period of time, have a little break, and then you can come back to it. Once you've been there for a minute with the warmth in the belly, you can come back, start feeling the anxiety again. And when you're feeling the anxiety, that's the way it allows it to unravel. So what you're doing is here, you're giving yourself space to contain and hold this anxiety so it can process and move through the system, right? Because that's what you want, really. That would be pendulation. So you'd go from the anxiety, it's like letting it tighten, it's like, fuck, I feel anxious, fuck, and then go imagine your pet dog, feeling into the warmth, then going back. And you'd go much slower than that. I'm just, for the purpose of this video, I'm going quickly. The second one is cohabitation, where you might use the resource to hold the anxiety. So you'd be with the anxiety, but you just imagine the warmth from the belly coming up and just holding that anxiety so it's held within a larger context of support. Then the anxiety can be anxious, it can be unsafe, it can be afraid, it can freak out, it can tighten, it can panic, and it's just held by that warmth. This is where you might bring a hand to the chest, just breathing into it. And you're letting it be anxious, but inviting in the presence of that supportive person, being, pet, whatever it might be. Maybe if it was your feet, you might just notice the groundedness of the feet, connecting that energy to the anxiety. And that makes it much easier to be with it. And the anxiety really loves all these difficult parts of us. They really want to be held, They really want to be allowed to be themselves, but be held in that. So they can be anxious and be sad, but they've got support. I found that a really powerful way of working with them. And you can totally mix it up, right? You can feel into what your body kind of wants. You can just, you might just, if you're feeling anxious, you might just like start shaking your hands and shaking your body and just breathing kind of fast. And then you might switch over to, then just relaxing. Holding yourself, giving yourself a hug, breathing deep. Then it's like back into the anxiety. Again, slower than this, but I'm just doing it faster for the purposes of this demonstration. And so you can use any combination of different imaginary things, breathing things, touching things, moving between different energies. You have to play around a bit and find what works well for you. So I just want to give you a list of all kinds of examples to really, really bed this home. Like what I've used the stillness around me a lot. I like, as I'm walking down the street, I can feel any tension and just hold it in that much wider space of the space all around me. So again, that's that more holding one. Recently, a really powerful one, I imagined a ring of all the people who've ever helped me on my own healing path. Like wonderful, amazing people have turned up. And I just imagine them all around me. They're all holding space for me, right? And just whatever I throw at them, they just stay, they're just there, they just stay there. I really feel that support. If I can just yell at them, I can show them all my worst aspects, all my selfishness and hatred and judgment. And they're still there, just calmly holding space for me. And that's kind of the larger context in which some of this other stuff can unfold, and like my hatred can, go off in my head and my body, and it's held. Or just bringing a hand to the heart, something you can do often just throughout the day, right? Because you can do this stuff just throughout the day. Feel your feet on the floor, just rubbing that spot that might be a little tense. Again, not to make it go away, but to support you to be with it more. Can't repeat that enough. It's to support you to be with these feelings, not to change them, push them away. So what do you do with this? Well, you need to practice it, right? You need to kind of build up a kind of a resourcing bank account, because you can get much better at turning to your resource and like connecting with that energy of it, whether it's the stability of the feet on the floor or invoking in the presence of that supportive being who loves you just as you are. You can get really good at it. And you want to get good at it when you're feeling okay. So you want to practice every day so that on that day when you get really overwhelmed, then you have some credit to draw on. And you've got some practice, you can just bam, turn to that place pretty effectively. And it's not going to make everything magically better, but it will support you to get through that day in a healthier way than otherwise would have been the case, right? And so you want to get into the habit of really resourcing as much as you can. Even as you're washing the dishes, you feel your feet on the floor. You're going to the loo, you put a hand on the heart. I don't know, whatever it might be. Or just taking 5 minutes to do it every day. You will notice the difference, I promise you. And what's the benefit of all of this? Well, it gives you space and capacity to be with what's coming through you, which means that you can process it and you can integrate it, and then it passes through, and then it's no longer in your system, right? The alternative way of distracting and numbing pushes everything back down, right? So you've got two options. You can either resource yourself and let everything come through, or you can push everything back down and it'll stay in the system. And there'll be, you won't be able to do it perfectly, but it's about just edging towards, by practicing, you can grow in our capacity to feel these big feelings that are coming through and let them move through. And it's kind of a skill and a practice we develop, right? And then as you go through life, you're processing everything that's coming your way rather than having to numb out to it. And the difference over the long term of a few years, say, is like night and day, If you don't process any of your stuff, you kind of end up, how there's those old people who are like really, really bitter? It's because there's nothing to do with being old per se. It's just that they've had like tons of time to just push more and more stuff down. They've just had more time to just, no, I'm not going to feel it. And so the alternative way is sometimes you meet those people who are really happy, right, really open. It's because they've had space. They've been more allowing of the emotions to come through, right? And you end up in totally different places if you just by those little daily practices that just, you start off like this and just end up at miles away from each other. So, any questions? Ping me a note. Do you want some support, developing your own resource, integrating, processing some gnarly emotions? Then just give me a shout or check out my website. I hope that was helpful. Peace out. Bye.